What is up, gamers? Today we are headed to the Atlantic City wastewater treatment and wind farm facility to be doing our Group 4 project. My name is Nush.
I'm Helena. I'm Helena.
This is Dalal and Shannon and Vinny, who's not in our group.
We got hard hats. Now we're going to see the wastewater treatment facility in the order that they treat the water.
I am so ready to learn about pollution.
Guess what we use to treat sewage? We use microbiology. So we visited this aeration basin, which basically pumps oxygen into the raw sewage so that microorganisms like not anaerobes, those are the wrong kind. It would be like obligate aerobes, facultative, anaerobes, and aerobe tolerant microorganisms or microaerophiles. Those would be able to if they were able to process the sewage, they would be able to grow in those conditions and sort of break down the organic compounds. And in addition to that, while most of the work is done by the bacteria, in anaerobic conditions, you can also use archaea. And after they're done processing the organic waste, they'll basically form a film at the top of the sewage and they'll sink down, and the water will basically be pretty clear by then. And in addition, you'll use sodium hypochlorite to disinfect the remaining water after treatment. So the problem is probiotics and antibiotics can be filtered out of wastewater. So if you're taking probiotics, that will remain in the sewage, and if you're taking antibiotics that go through like your digestive system, that will also remain. So probiotics aren't that much of an issue because they're actually finding ways to formulate probiotics now to filter wastewater. So that's actually might be a good thing. But antibiotics, that could cause antibiotic resistance, and there have been cases where antibiotic-resistant bacteria have been found in sewage streams, which isn't that good because, yay, we have antibiotic-resistant populations in the background, in the environment. And in addition, just like in general, not even looking at like antibiotic residue, overprescribing antibiotics in general can lead to bacteria becoming antibiotic resistant and being present in wastewater. And in addition, 60 to 80% of the energy that's used by the plant in general is used for aeration. So that is a lot of energy that's being consumed. And it might even be better to be able to find bacteria that can grow in anaerobic conditions that can also filter this wastewater to make this more effective. And in addition, nitrogen compounds and phosphorus and sulfur compounds are also found in wastewater. That can be fixed, but the bacteria that are used to fix them do take a long time to grow, so there are still some problems with the industry in general.
Several of the processes for treating wastewater that Shannon described emits greenhouse gases. First of all, the transportation of wastewater by vacuum tankers releases carbon dioxide, but this can be lessened if compressed biogas made of fruit scraps and animal waste is used for fuel instead of petroleum. In the aeration basin, whisking oxygen into the water is necessary for growing aerobic bacteria that digest the waste. These bacteria emit greenhouse gases, most notably carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. Wastewater treatment facilities contribute to 9% of the world's methane emissions and 3% of the world's nitrous oxide emissions. Nitrous oxide comes from ammonia oxidizing bacteria and denitrifying bacteria. Additionally, nitrogen from fertilizers and pesticides, as well as detergents, enters wastewater due to runoff from lawns, therefore supplying the bacteria with more nitrogen. Other bacteria use organic products and waste as their carbon source for cellular respiration, which produces carbon dioxide. When polymers are added to the wastewater to thicken the biosolids, the thickened sludge hosts microbes that produce methane and carbon dioxide. The anaerobic bacteria and methanogens especially produce most of the methane. This is a problem because carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane are very powerful greenhouse gases. The abundance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere captures too much sunlight and radiation that is reflected off of the Earth's surface. causing more heat to be trapped in the Earth's atmosphere and resulting in global warming.
So what are the effects of these emissions that Helena discussed on ecosystems? So there are a couple of key greenhouse gases that we're going to discuss, the first of them being CO2. So carbon dioxide is released from automotive exhaust pipes, from factories, etc., and it raises temperatures in the atmosphere and extends the growing season, along with increasing humidity. So this means that plants need more water to survive the longer growing season, and the added heat also puts more stress on plants. Moving on to another very important greenhouse gas, we're going to talk about methane, which is steadily driving climate change forward, as all greenhouse gases are. And atmospheric methane specifically often reacts in harmful ways. For example, in the atmosphere, it will be oxidized to form water vapor and more carbon dioxide, exacerbating the effects of CO2 itself. And this oxidation reaction itself is harmful because it's using up naturally occurring hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere that usually clean pollutants from the air. So the more methane there is, the more these hydroxyl radicals get used up, so the remaining pollutants in the air are less likely to be oxidized into less harmful compounds. And atmospheric methane is also the primary contributor to forming ground-level ozone, which in and of itself can be harmful to the environment in a number of ways. And one of the major mechanisms by which ground-level ozone is harmful to ecosystems is by interfering with photosynthesis. It inhibits plants' ability to open their stomata, which are small pores in the cuticles of their leaves that are essential for gas exchanges in photosynthesis. So this reduces the amount of CO2 that plants can process, also resulting in more CO2 left in the air, and reduces the amount of oxygen they can release, so it reduces air quality in general. And impeding with photosynthesis in this way also generates a number of other concerns, including the fact that interfering with this process means interfering with the main food source for many food chains. Plants make use of solar energy and convert the solar energy into the edible form of sugars that's useful for the rest of their food chain, first of all for primary consumers and then secondary and so on. And so impeding photosynthesis reduces energy flow through food chains and in turn through ecosystems. And additionally, interfering with photosynthesis interferes with habitats that are built primarily from vegetation.
Now that we know what emissions are made, I'll tell you why the health effects of these gases are not so nice. First off, carbon dioxide. Large amounts of and long exposure to carbon dioxide can cause dizziness, restlessness, difficulty breathing, tiredness, increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, coma, asphyxia, and convulsions. A lot of these symptoms are due to the fact of carbon dioxide taking the place of oxygen in higher concentrations so that the lung can't take in as much oxygen as needed and instead has to deal with the large amounts of carbon dioxide in the lungs. Next up, methane. Ground methane levels lead to ground ozone production and other particulate pollution, and even in lower levels, ozone can cause long-term harm and damages tissue by irritating and inflaming the air passageways and lungs. Inhalation of ozone pollution can cause damage to airways, cause asthma attacks, and increase rates of preterm birth, cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, and heightened risk of stroke. It's also harmful to elderly people and those with asthma due to their weaker lungs. It also leads to the same effects of carbon dioxide when causing oxygen deprivation. And lastly, nitrous oxide, which causes dizziness and unconsciousness, memory issues, and can cause infertility if exposed to long term. And as can be seen, the more that these gases get released into the atmosphere, the higher the concentration will be in relation to oxygen, and the more harmful substances that will be present on the ground, like ozone. Air quality will plummet, and health will worsen if measures aren't taken to regulate them.
Considering all these awful impacts, how are we reducing emissions from wastewater? On its own, treating wastewater results in reduced emissions compared to untreated water. Untreated water releases up to 3 times as much carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Wastewater treatment facilities are able to generate electricity using the biogas they generate from their sludge. This means they are reducing emissions by not having to use energy generated from sources such as fossil fuels, coal, or other emission-heavy sources. Certain facilities are able to generate more than they use. This energy can be sent out to people to power their homes and businesses, further offsetting emissions. To directly reduce emissions of the treatment facility, first, monitoring technologies must be put in place. These technologies can then inform the machinery in different parts of the facility on what changes need to be made and function. For example, in secondary treatment, the intensity of the whisks used to aerate the water can be adjusted to match the specific needs of the water in the tank at that time. In the future, emissions can potentially be eliminated completely, but that is still a work in progress. This plan is in the research phase at this time. Although we've made impressive progress in this endeavor, we still need to continue researching and promoting scientific innovation to optimize efficiency in wastewater treatment and reduce the emissions that result from this process as much as possible. This doesn't minimize how far we've come already. Wastewater treatment emissions are falling with every innovation we discover.